There are few works that can claim to have altered the course of media history in a drastic way, something that wasn't just important to many but was deeply influential to other important works. For instance, let me ask you this. What do Fate Stay Night, Cross Channel, and Sayo no Uta have in common? The obvious answer to those who know them by name and content might say that they're all critically acclaimed visual novels whose echoes are felt to this day. Fate managed to create an entire multimedia franchise that's still ongoing, inspiring an incalculable number of creators with its blend of myth and science fiction. Cross Channel has stood the test as one of the most meaningful and complex works of otaku literature, shaping the views of countless readers and their creations by broaching on topics few writers are brave enough to touch. And Sayo no Uta is not only the work that put Gen Urobuchi on the map long before Fate Zero Madoka Magica, but introduced many people in the West to visual novels for the first time. These three works, and what subsequently spawned from them, have been important to countless people across the world, but there's something else that ties them together besides their genre and notoriety. Because in the minds of each of these creators was the work of one particular studio, a cult classic that would forever change visual novels as we know it, and subsequently, all of Japanese media. Released in 2002 exclusively for Windows computers, Kusarihime Euthanasia was developed by Lyresoft, a name maybe best known within English spaces for creating Sononil, Inganok, and Forest. Three highly creative and beloved stories that have garnered small but dedicated followings thanks to their unique settings, fascinating characters, gorgeous artwork, stellar music, and captivating themes. Before any of those, however, it was Kusarihime that propelled Lyresoft into cult stardom, fueled by the writing of Meteoric Meteo, who went on to become an important part of Type Moon before long. Besides assisting of numerous games, he's also responsible for the Fate Requiem series of novels and Grand Order's best story arc, Thalum, a fascinating fusion of Lovecraftian horror with the series' signature sci-fi and fantasy mythos. Kusarihime tells the tale of one amnesiac man stuck in a torturous time loop, forced to repeat the same 4 days over and over again, with no memory of his past before a mysterious accident that took his family away from him. With only vague vestiges of days gone in his mind and the emptiness of the lost stirring within him, the reality of his life slowly unfurls with each repetition, alongside the horrifying truths behind the legend of the rotting princess. The blood of Kusarihime runs deep throughout visual novels and, by extension, Japanese media as a whole. It's the game that really popularized time loops within the genre. It brought cosmic horror to the forefront and directly influenced the theming of numerous games that would come after, such as those just discussed. Unfortunately though, as a title with a translation yet to actually drop in English, this is often where discussions of it end outside of Japanese spaces. And I think this game being boiled down to its impact rather than what it is by itself is kind of a shame. As a game that deals with the importance of memories, what it means for life to end, and the meaning of humanity in the grand scheme of the cosmos, Kusarihime can be a challenging title to get through despite its remarkably short length of less than 20 hours. But for those who push through it, there is a deeply resonant message to take away from it all, and a number of powerful moments that left me legitimately speechless. And the good news is, unlike many other niche classic horror VNs, Kusarihime is easy to get a hold of thanks to today's sponsor, DL Site. While big budget anime, games, and manga might be what get marketed the most these days out of Japan, it doesn't take but a glance outside the mainstream to realize just how expansive the world of modern Japanese media is, and how dedicated, passionate creators are to making works that build on what they love. From doujinshi to ASMR, to cute little fan games and huge original works inspired by classic series and fresh concepts alike, there is something out there for everybody being made by passionate artists and teams. And if you aren't in Japan, it can seem impossible to figure out how to dive into all this stuff while supporting the hardworking people behind it. And that's where DL Site comes in. They're one of the largest homes for buying digital Japanese media for your phone and computer, with a special focus on indie works. DL Site allows you to find creative, original Japanese works and buy them with ease. From modern passion projects by individuals like the hit RPG Demon's Roots, to classic niche studio works like the previously covered Extravaganza and today's horror classic Kusarihime, there is something for everybody. There are hundreds of thousands of works to choose from in every imaginable category, with more coming out every day in multiple languages. And buying things is as simple as purchasing points for DL Pay of your credit card or payment provider of choice, redeeming them to your account, and hitting the buy button on whatever's caught your eye. No matter where in the world you live, even if you don't know Japanese, DL Site makes it easy to find and enjoy tons of fun and interesting works, all while making sure your money goes right to the creators you want to support so they can keep making neat things. And as a special thanks just for being a viewer of this channel, DL Site is giving the first 500 of you 200 yen off a purchase, regardless of whether or not you're a longtime user or new to everything there. So if anything I say in this video makes you want to check this game out, or perhaps puts you in the mood for something more relaxing like a gentle ASMR from your favorite 2D girl, then follow along with the link in the description and explore the wonderful world that awaits. A huge thank you goes to VL Site for sponsoring this video. I've been using them for a while now, both to get things for work and just fun stuff in my spare time, and I've always found their site a pleasure to use. So what better time to explore them than now with a little discount for your next adventure? And speaking of adventures, I think it's finally time to dive into what awaits within the world of Kusarihime, to put its influence aside and discuss why it's still a fascinating work in and of itself. This is the story of the rotting princess, and the town which at the end of time fades to a blood-red snow. Kusarihime is set in then-contemporary Japan and follows the perspective of one Itsuki Hikawa, a young man who, up until very recently, had been living in Tokyo, until a mysterious event not only took his memory away from him, but the life of his beloved younger sister Judy and his biological parents, Takayake and Akane. After being discharged from the hospital, he found himself on a trip back to his rural hometown of Tokamori in hopes of remembering his past, with his step-family awaiting him there, the kind and motherly Yoshino, the bratty younger sister Jun, and the peppy tomboy cousin Natsuki. Though time is peaceful for a short while, everything changes when he goes off the beaten path to town one day and finds his way to a mysterious lake. And within that lake is something that seems as if it shouldn't exist. A lone girl named Oni Kurame, clad in a crimson-red kimono, tainted with the scent of rotting fruit, and bearing the face of Itsuki's deceased younger sister. As mysterious as who she is are the things she says, that they've met once again and ask him to head to the promised land with her. It's with her appearance and the rotting wound she bestows upon him that everything begins to change for the amnesiac young man. Buried memories of his past he thought he had forgotten come back, many as beautiful as there are brutal and horrifying. And these memories, vague as they can be, make clear that all those around him who claim to support him have their own motives for wanting his memories to stay buried or come back with clarity. Adding even more fuel to the fire is a certain myth within the town itself with the Kusarihime, the rotting princess. A legend that says a woman named Kurame has the power to grant anyone's wish at the cost of rotting those who borrow her power. And though the truth of this may be uncertain, it is clear that something supernatural is at play, as 3 days after Itsuki's meeting with the girl, everyone melts into crimson snow before the clock reverses and time repeats. Within each of these repetitions, Itsuki finds out something new about the people in the world around him, past transgressions that tore friends and family apart, dark desires that no one could bear to admit to, grand secrets that may very well bend the fabric of reality, and hidden truths about what really happened to him and his family that are perhaps better left unknown. Just what are these secrets he holds, and who's right in wanting them known or buried? Why does the world turn to crimson snow and repeat every 4 days, and is it related to the myth of the Kusarihime? And just what is Kurame, and why does she look like Itsuki's long-gone younger sister? For Itsuki, all these questions and more plague him as his memory slowly returns, and he begins to become aware of the nature of this world and the horrors that lay within it. I like time loop stories quite a bit. Whether it's Shinya Kokimi's brutal and complex horror achieved through ever-changing repetitions, or cross-channel's philosophical dialogue and character explorations found through loops, it's a trope that's hard to do right but turns out so good when it is. And despite being one of the very first notable examples of it within VNs, Kusarihime gets it right. Most crucially, it avoids the pacing issues that tend to plague this and adjacent time-bending narratives by making each loop unique. The game is segmented into 11 loops, each taking place across the same set of days with the same cast and some key shared events, but everything from minor prosaic details to entire defining events get changed between repetitions. The best comparison I can come up with for the structure is that it's like a series of vignettes, albeit with a larger scope than just showing a man in 1960s Germany enjoying a good blunt smokin'. Each of the first 10 loops captures a moment of time with vivid wording and imagery, focusing on different aspects of the grander narrative, before finally wrapping everything up in the 11th loop. Not only does the game take you through them in a linear order, but most choices only exist to influence how Itsuki processes something internally without changing the external outcome. Once you've played through the game a single time, you have seen almost all there is to see in writing. Replaying the game is only important to see the few alternate scenes present and to unlock the other two endings. For total transparency, I did play through this game with a guide, but I can't say that any of the requirements for any ends stood out to me as particularly ridiculous to solve on your own with full context. After playing through and doing a video on Extravaganza with its utterly baffling moon logic, I cannot express how nice it felt to play something that didn't make my brain melt into dollar store jello. At least, not in that way. We'll get to the other morphings. Regardless, Meteo's incredible use of this structure means that the story proceeds at a steady and quick rate, even from the very beginning. I was playing through this game as I was first getting set up for living in Brazil for the next couple months, and even with my ADHD and running around trying to make a usable living and workspace, I found it hard to pull myself away once it got its claws into me. Kusarihime is, first and foremost, a very character-driven title, and that the writing is focused on dynamics and interactions rather than the world itself. I don't want to say the setting isn't realized, because Mori as a town is full of character and is very realized, but it's not like a lot of other horror stories in rural settings where the town as a whole is given the same importance as a character. Here, it's a way to give a grounded setting that's meant to be filled in by your knowledge of what it's like to live in an environment like that, or what you've heard of them. I have never lived in Japan, let alone in Inaka, so I can't speak to how close the vibes are to that exactly, but I did grow up in a rural town in the better Washington state, not DC, for the first 14 years of my life, and the vibes here remind me a lot of that. Part of that is because, as I'll get into shortly, this game is fucking gorgeous. The art style and presentation capture a very nostalgic and quirky feeling, which complements the intentions of the more slice-of-life segments perfectly. Everyone here is less focused on leading a busy, business-focused life, and more just on tending to their tasks and being around other people. While there's only a handful of characters who are genuinely very important to the story, even the interactions with the random old folk hanging about, teachers of friends, or the keep at the cafe feel full of familiarity in life. Like, even without knowing much about the goofy cop Sayaka or the old guys running around the city council, you still get a sense they were once a part of Itsuki's life and matter to those around him. For a game that's all about some challenging themes and can often be difficult to stomach due to its intensity, the way these moments offer calm and show Itsuki some comfort in his most trying times not only feels thematically appropriate, as I'll get into later, but the reprieves keep the game from feeling like a rapid fire of suffering under the weight of trauma. The Inaka setting helps as well to lend credence to the myth of Kusarihime. If this game were set in Tokyo or something, then everyone believing in this mysterious story would throw more gas onto the "it's blindingly obvious this is a real thing in the story" fire. But in a rural village where small traditions hold value and weight, the tale of the Scarlet Rotgia feels like a genuine myth that could be complete conjecture or actually related to the matters at hand. Combine that with Meteo's penchant for misdirecting the reader and cast through incomplete info, and our protagonist got a genuine mystery on his hands. Itsuki is a prime example of how purity and apparent kindness in someone doesn't always come from great places, an example of contrast that's core to the themes of the narrative. He is, in both the past and present, a very caring person to an extent that's detrimental to him and exploited by others in ways that aren't clear until later on. We just know from the start that in the same way nostalgia often glazes over the more painful parts of our memory, things weren't as beautiful as his hopes lead him to believe. A lot of the drama in the story comes from seeing how these nostalgic yearnings for an imagined perfect past begin to crumble and force him to ask difficult questions. Do memories define us? Are there fundamental aspects to a person that are unchanged or we all nurture? Do we need memories to live, or is it best that we forget the painful experiences that we presume have shaped us? Everyone here has their own answers to these questions, and most of them have some sort of ulterior motive. For instance, there's Itsuki's step-cousin, Natsuki. Bright, chipper, and silly, she's the typical outdoorsy tomboy who speaks rough and cares deeply for those around her, including Itsuki, regularly insisting that he get his memory back and trying to help him with it. Why that isn't clear at first, but it's obvious something isn't quite right when she snaps at multiple people early on for trying to pull him away from her just because they asked if he really does want to remember. On the other end of the spectrum is Kiriko Issei, a shy student who claims to have been Itsuki's girlfriend before he lost his memory, and comes to Mori to take him back to Tokyo, believing this not to be the place where he belongs. However, things feel off with her story, and by a quarter of the way through, we learn that she was Itsuki's former crush who rejected him due to her own inability to deal with her feelings and felt immense guilt, not wanting him to recall their messy past. Even people who seem like good innocent folk that just want to help, like his stepmother Yoshino, are harboring horrible dark secrets that tie into a larger web of Itsuki's entire family, and characters who attempt to push against others' motives, like his and Natsuki's childhood friend Seiji Yamaka, get scolded for trying to give Itsuki any agency. It's some compelling drama. People see Itsuki as a slate to push around and mold in specific ways to achieve the version of him they desire, which feels really resonant as a trans woman with PTSD and what was for a long time a very scattered memory. Seeing him get led along by people who won't explain themselves but assure that they know the real him and that they know what's best for him is pretty uncomfortable and ties into some interesting points later on about the fear of losing oneself. And of course, there's the poster girl for this game, Kurame. First seen in a mysterious encounter at the lake and soon tagging along with Itsuki throughout his daily life, her existence is utterly mysterious to Itsuki for the first few loops. Like, why does she look like his long-gone sister Judy? Why does she seem as if she's from another time? And what the hell is going on with this scene where she seduces a guy before brutally murdering him and his friend? The only thing that's clear from the beginning is that she is pretty damn adorable for cutesy demeanor, utterly terrifying with her sudden shifts to a demonic-like presence, and absolutely baffling with her possible ties to the myth of Kusarihime. Of equal importance to all alive, though, are those who are gone. It's hinted at early on that there are some not okay things happening with Itsuki's biological parents, and his younger sister Judy comes off as just a bit eccentric of her love for her brother in flashbacks. Combine that with the reactions people have towards her name, ranging from disquieted fear to outright rage as if she were some sort of monster, and it's apparent that Itsuki's family was embroiled in some complicated shit. What I think makes the writing of Kusarihime's characters most interesting, though, is how it manages to make them feel like they have the same level of development as those in a much bigger game. There is so much implied within the dynamics and glimpses of the past that by the end, you have a clear sense for each character's motivations and the depths of their personality without ever saying all that much. You just have to be the one to put it together. It's some fantastic character writing that really gets the reader involved with the story as much as the writer, and allows it to spend its emoji count on thematics and the mysteries. From stunning moments of depraved humanity to partial flashbacks and otherworldly interjections, you are always meant to be questioning what everything means and what it adds up to, as well as to stumble into seemingly unsurmountable walls due to unreliable characters. They often make mistakes, say the wrong things, hide things, and do everything they can to preserve themselves and hide from their desires until the fruit comes to bear and eventually rot. Is anything they're telling Itsuki about themselves, his past, the myths, the village, or any some such real? Or is it all selfishly motivated to preserve their own emotions? Are these moments of seeing Kurame gearing up to murder someone with the magic claw really real? Are timelines getting jumbled together? Like any good mystery and or thriller, Kusarihime manages to keep the reader constantly hooked with these questions and more. Even during my longest reading sessions, I still had to take breaks to lay down and wonder just what the hell I saw and where the story might be going, as the game is infamously divisive in its vagueness.
It's often not smart to explain everything, and sometimes it ruins the rhythm of the story, so we avoided it a lot. You have to leave the choice of where to cut off explanations and where to shorten things to the creators, and I don't think that there are any completely right answers. I'm sure there are many people out there who think, Kusarihime let me fantasize a lot, so I enjoyed it, while others will say, it didn't explain enough. You have to be smart and change things based on the current trends. That's the real job of the creators.
While I was initially baffled by the game at points, I think I really respect Meteo's view at this point. It makes sense thematically too, as the lack of explanation ties into the feelings of confusion, grandiosity, and mystery, which makes the story much larger than it is and goes into a theme brought up by the very end. But in another way, it means your head will explode if you try to understand things linearly. You just have to accept you aren't going to have clear-cut answers for many things by the end, and any explanation you craft is going to be conspiracy theory. Fairly grounded, sure, but there's going to be a lot of holes, and Alex Jones isn't here to help you.
Not coming!
What keeps everything together is Meteo's incredible sense for storytelling. Like many other popular untranslated titles, Kusarihime has gotten notoriety in English spaces for the quality and verbosity of its writing. But unlike many of those, the English writers might have already gotten a glimpse into it thanks to the existence of Fake Grand Order like I talked about earlier. Even long after I quit playing this game in favor of Blue Archive, Salem stayed in my memory as by far the best story arc contained within for how it manages to integrate Lovecraft mythos into the series' dense lore without skipping a beat. Maybe Atlantis and later have a leg up on it, but I haven't read those yet. It's also a great example of just how diverse Meteo's interests in media are with the sheer number of things it references and which influenced its narrative. Something apparent as far back as Kusarihime, one of many parallels that can be drawn between the two. Both are set in a rural village where many people aren't what they seem, both feature time loops, both are horror mysteries, and both have fan-favorite girls with more to them than just their cute appearance. So if one of your computing devices was ever infected by the machinations of Lazangle, you probably have an idea of what to expect here. Meteo writes all of his characters with very distinct voices. You can easily tell who's who entirely by the way they construct sentences, their level of politeness, the wording they choose to use, and sometimes their accent, and furthermore, all of those give hints as to the kind of people they are, the lives they've lived, without saying as much outright. Even when the text has its rare moments of becoming theatrical and grand, it's a cinch to read. Doubly so given that it generally doesn't use much complicated vocabulary. I had to look up a few words here and there, but I otherwise blazed through it in about 13 hours, and slower readers can expect probably around 20 to 25. Where people are going to struggle, if anywhere, is in the prose. In terms of style, Kusarihime feels a lot more explicit in its attempt to be novelistic than either of the other notably purple writers I've discussed so far in this channel. While Romeo delivers profound ideas quickly and snappily, and Maruto instills verbose lines of a human warmth and clarity, Meteo writes Itsuki's monologue in a way that feels very poetic and contemplative. Many of his thoughts are elaborate, rhythmic, and descriptive in a way that feels like someone trying their best to understand the world around them, but is always missing something. It flows smoothly and clearly, but it's far from being a stream of consciousness, and given that he's an amnesiac, it taking taking that level of effort to process plot kind of makes sense. I don't think this is me reading too deep into it either, because there is a really stark contrast with other forms of narration. There's some segments where it shifts over to Jun or Yoshino or Seiji, and all of them feel much more natural and normal. Even the third-person narration, which aims to be as flowery, feels so in a very effortless way compared to Itsuki. Another aspect in which Meteo's incredible craft shows is within the horror. This game is goddamn incredible at building tension and delivering on it, screwing with the player's mind in evocative ways, knowing when to show and withhold imagery, and knowing when to make the prose curt and when to make it expository and dense. I feel this shows best in the adult content. This is a game that deals very extensively with sexual abuse as a topic, and especially within families. That's not abnormal for Edoge, but what makes Kusarihime special is how much of it is framed as horror, shot composition and prose working together to make the dread palpable, and quite a few scenes only go as far, visually, as giving a hint to what's occurring. Some of these shots and the voice acting that accompanies them are burned into my memory as some incredible instances of how having restraint can make horror more poignant. But being Edoge and having the licenses that come with that, it doesn't have fear of being more explicit with its framing of events either. I think it manages the tightrope act of taboo erotic fiction and fucked up character moments well enough to not become offensively dismissive like, say, Shizuku by Leaf. It's dark and disturbing, but it's treated with the proper amount of weight and often with some very realistic and melancholic story consequences. The only thing I can really criticize here is the scene-specific artwork, which is a shame because this game is otherwise gorgeous. Kusarihime was primarily illustrated by Tetsuya Nakamura, a little-known mangaka and graphics artist who's been around since the early 90s, cutting his teeth on titles like Sylvan for the Game Gear and various manga before getting hired by Lyresoft, taking on the role of both an ideas man and the lead illustrator here. What we've ended up then is a game that looks nothing like any other VN I read. For starters, the backgrounds are in a totally different style from everything else. They have this rustic watercolor look that resembles old 256 color Macromedia adventure games. There's grit and grain and dither to everything that isn't as extreme as something like on the PC-88 or similar, but it's far from being refined. It's diverse and vibrant, yet rough and nostalgic. That's contrasted by the presentation of the characters, which is very different from what you might be used to. Rather than exclusively use standing sprites, most sprites here are made to slot into specific backgrounds and scenes with little reuse, gorgeously monochromatic mixture of tints made to stand out further by way of thick white outlines as if all were paper cutouts. To say it has aged like premium grade wine is pitifully underselling it. Playing this game on a 3K OLED laptop display, perfectly pixel scaled, felt like watching a beautifully preserved art exhibition come to life. Combine it with writing into slice of life segments that can change between serene and wistful melancholic longing, and it's hard not to get emotional over things as simple as two characters just walking around town and reminiscing. It feels like the young, innocent yearning to know more about the world turned into a tangible aesthetic, reminding me of the times as an isolated kid that I'd conjure up these foggy ideas of what the world was like. It was all blurry and hacked together in my mind, assembled from collages of things I'd seen and shows I'd watched and music I'd heard. Beautiful and serene, yet so solemn and untouchable, realized here with pristine clarity. So many shots in this game feel like paintings unto themselves, yet are treated as just another part of the experience. It gives this vibe that even the most mundane of moments contains something beautiful. Plus, I just love Tetsuya's style in general. The official materials book makes reference to YKK being an influence here, which I feel is not only present in the mixture of aesthetics and the melancholic serenity of the slice of life parts, but in how Tetsuya draws people. Soft yet rough with exaggerated facial features in very respectable proportions. In some ways, it reminds me of something like Etrian Odyssey or Made in Abyss, just a lot less chibi. As accomplished as all of this is, however, the CGs are a total mixed bag. While some like the flashback sequences rival the main game with their washed out monotone watercolor stylings, others like the adult scenes range in quality from acceptable to downright baffling. It just feels inconsistent, going from the most gorgeous emotionally moving shit you've ever seen to rush job Nuki-Gate artwork levels of art quality in an instant gave me some serious whiplash. And much like the art, the sound here as well is mostly positive, some weird quirks here and there. To start off strong though, the voice acting here is stellar. There's a lot of notable seiyuu who worked on this game as one of their first gigs, including Fujisaki Kaori, Wadakayo, Mizusawa Gei, and a ton more who would later find success in games like I.O., Grisaya, and Swan Song. They are all excellent performances too. Special shoutouts have to go to Honma Yukari as Kurame, bouncing between murderous ASMR-like tones to cutesy lovey-dovey Nissan worship, as well as Kaiji Toyuki as Jun, who nails her bratty, standoffish tone in a perfect way that makes the few moments she breaks it very stand out. There is one particular scene that is seared into my memory, and 90% of that is owed to her performance. The catch though is that this is not a full voice game. Not only are the side characters and the protagonists unvoiced, but even those who are spend a sizable portion of the game silent. It's not an uncommon quirk for 2000s Edoge, but it does feel very pronounced here by how random voice scenes are. Sometimes you'll have a meaningful and philosophical dialogue of only the music playing, and other times you'll hear about household affairs with vibrant different flair. It doesn't dampen enjoyment of the game much, it's just bizarre. Just as wonderful as the voice acting, though, is the score. Composed by the group No Brand Sounds, comprised of musicians known for the Thunder Force series and some of the Atelier games, among others, Kusarihime's soundtrack may very well be one of my favorites of any 2000 eroge that I've heard. Admittedly, I'm a bit biased because Hayakataro Tsukumo worked on this title, and he is one of the reasons I got into music in the first place, but as a minorly accomplished game musician, I think I can speak earnestly that this OST rocks. Coming in at 21 tracks, there is a very impressive variety of tunes on offer here, ranging from relaxed and casual to mythical and mysterious to tear-jerking and emotional, and all tied together with leitmotifs and consistent sound design invoking the styling of the 90s thanks to liberal use of Roland's classic 88 Pro sound module. It is a gorgeously nostalgic soundscape, and of everything on offer, I think my favorite has to be the track Kusarihime no Densetsu, or The Legend of the Rotting Princess. It is a beautiful mixture of classical Japanese music composition techniques and instruments with more modern sounds, slowly building up from a quiet and reserved melancholy to a full blast of a powerful drum kit and wonderfully 90s sounds joining the accompaniment. I have heard it dozens of times, and the drop still sends chills down my spine. Some people say the soundtrack can be repetitive while reading, and I don't know, maybe it's because I cleared the game in half the time some of the readers said they took, but I can't say I ever felt that way. The game was consistently showing new pieces of music as I progressed and reusing familiar ones in creative ways. The only issue I have really is the occasional awkward placement, but that just broadly seems to be an issue in eroge. And also, the game engine has no fade-ins or outs, which feels really disorientating. On that note, I should probably mention that Kusarihime has two separate releases on different versions of the same engine. The first is the retail release from 2002, which runs at 640 by 480 and requires a CD and drive or a hack in order to get music playback. It also crashed my computer once. The other version, which you should play, is the 2007 release that fixes the problem where the opening movie didn't play, ups the resolution to 800 by 600, has stability patches, and is on most Japanese adult game digital storefronts. Unless you have a 6,000 to 8,000 yen hole burning in your pocket and fucking hate opening movies, I can't say I really recommend getting the 2002 release, as it's just a worse experience in every way. It's more clumsy, it looks worse, and it costs significantly more money than just snagging the game off a DL site or something. And I do recommend giving it a shot if it interests you. Kusarihime is one of the most creative titles in the genre, and to get into that proper, I'm going to be diving into spoiler territory. So if you don't want to know all the twists of the game, then skip ahead to the ending segment where I give my concluding thoughts. But before that, I'd like to take a moment to shout out all the patrons and donors who make content like this possible, and shout out some cool folks that you should watch. Hey, Amelie, Doree, Noel here, and welcome to the Patreon segment, that part of the video where I do awful, outdated Vsauce impressions, give life and channel updates, shout out cool things, and give thanks to all the donors and sponsors who make this content possible. For the first, well, I already checked it off the list, so let's just move on to the second. For those who don't follow my Twitter or Patreon updates, I am working on this video from Brazil. I've got a place in the state of Sao Paulo for the next few months, and I'm very much enjoying my time here with all the pretty nature and the good food and the cool people, and also my boyfriend. That last part is really important. I've also been taking life way slower since getting here, because I damn near burnt myself out with the last two videos being absolute behemoths and taking a toll on my mental health I wasn't exactly ready for, given my living situation at the time not being great. But hey, I'm all better now, that's all better since I have and will have my own place, so cheers to not being a burnt out video essayist for once. And also, cheers to all of you guys who are raising just shy of 2,000 USD this month. I am continually amazed by how steady growth on the Patreon continues to be. It's really encouraging to see new people show up, leave their thoughts on videos, and give new suggestions, which in turn just make the channel better, as well as the income making it possible for me to do stuff like buy things for the channel and just in general live a life with less money stress and thus more energy to put forth into making better works. It is amazing how much easier it is to make things, especially draining creative things, when you're not stressed about other stuff as much. So thank you all so much. And as per usual, I'd like to take a moment to shout out some cool folks and things from the community and that I found around and about. If you would also like a chance at getting shouted out, then feel free to drop me a line on Twitter, Tumblr, my email, or even my Patreon messages. I'm always looking for more neat folks to give well-deserved attention to. The first person I'd like to shout out is Shira, who runs a channel called Tech Ambrosia. I don't talk about it a ton on here, but I am very much a retro computer geek, so I was elated when I got recommended her video on the original Voodoo graphics card and found it to be everything I was hoping for. As a really important piece of history that I think anyone with an interest in tech and gaming should learn about for how it's shaped 3D graphics to this day, she manages to do it justice. Slick, clean, and simple presentation of wonderful visuals and well-researched scripting, it's a comprehensive and easy to understand and dive into what can very easily become a complicated topic given the legacy of that graphics card and the general fuckiness of 90s computing. The rest of her content is like this as well from what I've seen, which makes it a serious shame that she has less than 2,000 subs at the time of writing this. So if you're like me and love old tech, then give her videos some much deserved attention and learn about computing history while you're at it. The second person I'd like to shout out is Neo, who runs a blog on Tumblr titled Idlest Draws, where she makes weird, esoteric artwork, mostly of bunnies and other animals in odd situations and forms, and also some really hot dudes. I don't have a ton to add to it all, I just think it's super neat and creative and vibes hard as fuck in its sincerity. Go check it out if you get a chance, she's talented as hell. And with those two hopefully popped up in other tabs to check out after this video, I would like to take a moment to answer some Patreon Q&As. So let's go! Yudigasaki asks, what's your dream VN creator collab? Like, if you could put one director, one writer, one artist, and one composer in a room, give them all the budget they need and see what they crank out together, who would it be and why? God, Izumi Banya as the director, Tanaka Romeo as the writer, Ueda Meto as the artist, and Sapporo Momoko as composer? I guess? I don't know, it's an idea. Man, Romeo working under Banya would be godly. Yuki asks, are you planning on doing more content like the video on the Freedio or weird trans barcode battling manga? Actually, yes, I have some ideas floating around, I just need to decide on something and make it materialize. I'd love to do a video on Mahalako or Sumichan, for instance, or a sequel to the Freedio vid. This also doubles as an answer to Maddie Hunter's question as to whether or not I'd cover non-VN Japanese media. I definitely plan to. Cuba200611 asks, what are some of your favorite music tracks from VN/ADVs? Kusarihime no Densetsu from Kusarihime, Crossing and Signal from Cross Channel, Messenger from Steins Gate Zero, Toki no Maho from White Album 2, Ao Kikodoku from Extravaganza, Mugen no Nemuri from Kankatana, Movement 1 from Yuno, and Leaf Ticket from Parfait are just a couple that come to mind. But really, I could ramble about my favorite VN music forever. There is so much to choose from. Okay, with all that said, I think it's finally time to wrap up this segment. Once again, I want to thank everybody that makes these videos possible. Your support not only means the world to me, but it's what keeps me afloat and able to enjoy life. I'm hoping that last part keeps improving from here now that I'm in a better living situation and I'm trying to only work weekdays 9 to 5. It's weird adjusting to not spending every waking minute doing something for a job just so I can fill my brain and not stress about stuff, but it does feel a lot better, and I hope that reflects a bit in the quality of the script and the tone of my voice. I've had a couple people now tell me I sound a lot happier, and if you would like to help make these videos possible, have your name scrolling along with these other cool folks, see videos early sometimes, watch them without cuts, suggest games, get monthly updates, and other neato things, then consider supporting me monthly on Patreon or Ko-fi, or one time via the latter. Minimum is $1 a month, there was no tier gating for content, and I just switched over to Dropbox for uncut videos, so no more bandwidth issues like there were for a while with Mega. I am so fucking sorry about that. But if you can't or don't want to donate, that is totally okay too. Liking, sharing, commenting, subscribing, and all that other stuff is a huge part of what makes these videos possible, and I can't express my earnest appreciation enough for every last bit of it. All of you are awesome, and I literally would not be here without you, so thank you so much, and let's get back to the show. Before I get any further, I need to hammer this disclaimer in. Kusarihime's story is purposefully vague on a lot of particulars, and part of the reason this video ended up delayed is because I kept going back and forth on myself on my interpretations of events, making connections that didn't exist to fill voids, and eventually poring over the interviews included with the official materials book. While I don't think reading this is at all necessary to make sense of the game, I would highly recommend it if you're at all left with doubts after reading. Meteo and Tatsuya clear up a lot of the vaguer aspects of the game within it, as well as add new details that I do think add to the experience. As well as this, I recommend playing the prequel Fantasy Jamais Vu, which expands on a few brushed over plot beats and gives more detail to Itsuki's family that wasn't previously present. Above anything though, I want to thank the friends who I talked about this game with back and forth for hours in order to make sense of my thoughts. If it weren't for their help, this video would have been a lot worse, so thank you, y'all know who you are. But still, none of this makes me foolproof, and I encourage you to read the game for yourself when and where possible, or at the very least, disclaim that any takeaways from my video are my machinations. With all this said, I want to dive into the game going in order of character arcs for the first half, and then just as it makes sense for the video for the back half, exploring what themes I feel are fascinating as they come up, and ultimately diving into its final questions it asks when it goes full sci-fi. For now though, we have a lot to discuss in just the first half. The first of the characters to have their arc finished, as we see in the first and third loops, is Kiriko Issei, who, as stated before, arrived at Itsuki's hospital room one day claiming to be his girlfriend, only for the reader to find out that the two merely had a mutual crush which she denied and pushed against, much to their mutual suffering. It's for that reason she doesn't want Itsuki to recall his past, because if he did, he may know the truth about how much pain she had caused him. While the meaning of memory is a key theme of the entire game, it's fitting that it's brought most to the forefront in this very first loop here. Itsuki, who's forgotten his past ever go back to the Itsuki that people knew? Or has this period of his life irrevocably altered him to somebody different? And if so, what do memories really mean to people if they alone do not have the power to define oneself like they're often believed to? Is it worth simply starting fresh? What's most interesting within the whole of Kusarihime regarding this concept is how little agency Itsuki is given over remembering his past. He does actively fight for it at many points, but whether or not he actually recalls it is not exactly his prerogative. Between specters of Judy appearing within the loops others are never aware of, memories floating back to him at random, and the people around him being manipulated by Kurame to force specific events to occur, Itsuki's past is an unavoidable thing that he has to answer to, which, as I'll get into much later, is at odds with the grand significance of it. For Kiriko though, Itsuki remembering his past isn't a matter of him re-self-actualizing because she already has a version of him made up in her head from brief meetings and conversations with people like Seiji. Her stance on the importance of his memory is made quite clear when she tells him that the past is nothing but the past. It's not important or needed to live for the now and the future. That opinion is bolstered by something she notices in him, that even with his memory gone, he still behaves much the way he'd been known to, kind and caring with a will to sacrifice. It's that exact same will though that's a common fixture of how his life took terrible turn after terrible turn, and even in Kiriko's arc as she manages to get him to make love to her merely on the grounds that she seems important to him. In a way, it's heartwarming to see them finally have their wishes answered once you know her full backstory, but it feels just as painful once you realize that Kiriko is trying to decide Itsuki's life for him out of a deeply selfish desire, one that Itsuki once wanted, but it feels now like he's being pushed into. And of course, even when Kiriko gets what she desires, it's not for long, as the conclusion of both of her loops see the world being consumed by the crimson snow moments after they finish their deeds. The end of her first loop marks the first time we see this imagery, and it's startling. It's beautiful in its vibrancy, horrifying in its brutality, and a clear demonstration of Kurame's power to reduce all to nothing and manipulate time. Her other important power, though, is her ability to bestow a rotting wound onto people with her claw, which for Itsuki is a physical manifestation of the pain that remembering his past brings, seen to throb in agony when particularly painful memories come back. Yet for others, it's a mark of their imminent rise to joy and ecstasy before rotting at their apex, turning to the snow. Kiriko is the first to die in this way, the corpse of her real person and spirit brutally murdered by Kurame after she finally gets to be with Itsuki like she'd been desiring all this time, replaced with a hollowed out version of herself. Even though her wish is maybe the least egregious of the three who are killed, her death is a necessity for Kurame's goals to move forward, and so we enter Natsuki's story. Throughout the introduction to the game, she comes off as a peppy, happy tomboy character who just wants to be a good friend to her younger cousin and very desperately wants him to remember his past. While it may seem at first she just views it as an inseparable part of him, the reality goes far deeper because before Itsuki had entered into the Hikawa family, he knew Natsuki as a friend from school. By her recollection, him, her, and Seiji were three very close-knit friends who spent all their time together, which is a fact and is supported by flashbacks Itsuki sees of the three of them hanging out together. Except, it's far more complicated than this, as after a certain point, she developed a crush on Seiji and kept hanging out with Itsuki in order to get close to him, eventually raping him to stir up Seiji to get his attention, and subsequently damaging the bonds of their friendships. While Natsuki does seem to view Itsuki's memories as something important for him to an extent, her interest in them is mostly selfish. The guilt of her assault against him tears at her, and she's desperate for Itsuki to punish her like she feels she desires, going as far as to repeat the same mistake in both of her loops. Once in the library when he has only the foggiest idea what she'd done to him, and once again in an abandoned facility for her second loop when Itsuki asks her to help him remember everything. I think it's that latter scene that really starts to call Itsuki's feverish dedication to his past into question. Anything and everything he has to do to remember his life, he's willing to do, even if it means hurting himself and going along with some truly awful shit, because being hurt like this is something he would have allowed in the past, and he wants that past to be a part of him again. There is a certain kind of visceral and disgusting horror to watching the act unfold, especially in how much joy Natsuki takes in violating him and how much the pros emphasize the discomfort that Itsuki feels, all leading to when he remembers the moment of his assault in visceral detail, and later contrasted by wonderful childhood memories of them playing together joyously. What makes it all connected though is the final scene. The two meet one last time on a balcony, and moments before she fades, Itsuki attempts not to give her the scolding that she desires, but true to his kind nature, attempts to forgive her, saying it can't be helped because that's Natsuki, and she refuses it. Because Itsuki doesn't have a reason to. He shouldn't be willing to throw himself into turmoil just to appease others and then forgiving it all. But at the very least, she is happy to not be hated by him as she fades away into crimson. Being about a third of the way through the game, this ending marks a turning point for Itsuki's character, as it dawns on him here on out that this past he's been so dedicated to trying to remember was full of horrible suffering that weighs heavy on the soul. It's a painful conundrum with no good outcome for him. Either he feels as if something is missing for his entire life, or he remembers and is burdened by those like Natsuki. She is a very, very bad person who did a horrible and selfish thing, and by her own admission will continue to do horrible and selfish things, all culminating in these final moments of each loop where she assaults Itsuki purely for the sake of provoking the response that she desires. It shows rape as an act of power in a really unorthodox but poignant way. It's to lead his emotions into a specific dark place to satisfy her own desire to be righteously hurt. And in the end, I don't think either of them end up completely satisfied. Natsuki may not be despised by Itsuki and that much warms her, but she was never given the blame she desired. Her sin went unpunished and her wish unfulfilled. And Itsuki not only was made to bear another wound on top of what she did in his past, but had it further drilled into his mind that life was not the beautiful nostalgic visage he once fought, but one of manipulation and pain. And yet he still cannot bring himself to dislike her or anyone else because he's kind. Because it's Natsuki, so it can't be helped. And I think that's the most interesting part of this arc, at least in as far as to how relatable I found it. The way concepts of kindness converge into and become pathological altruism on the far end, putting others' feelings above yours to the point of self-harm. Itsuki, time and time again, is said and shown to be this type of person. Someone who would never speak up no matter how they were wronged. Someone who can barely say what they desire because the person in front of them wants something different. He cannot possibly bring himself to offend others or disturb a peace because it's seen as kind by society to stay quiet when others wrong you. Even, and sometimes especially, in the case of sexual assault. A lot of perpetrators know that people are often shamed if they speak up, and know that many people who get abused are the kinds who have been taught to stay quiet, to be kind, and I've been told as much by the very person who molested me, to say nothing of the victim shaming I grew up hearing from my parents towards people in general. I internalized from them from a very young age that not making a fuss over being hurt or scared or whatever was kind to the people around you, that not bothering others with your negative emotions was kind, that going with the flow and not ever disturbing it was kind, and that by complaining at all I was being a burden, I was being unkind to family. After all, families get mad at and hurt each other, so it can't be helped, right? As an adult who's been put down by people time and time again, I find it hard to believe that any of the silence I was forced to endure and sustain was kind or excusable, even by familial bonds. It was self-sacrifice for the sake of altruism so others didn't have to think about their actions, and there is nothing in this kind on either end. Maybe most deviously is how the idea itself makes reconciliation near impossible. How is one expected to express themselves to people who have hurt them when all they've been told is those expressions aren't kind and kindness is what we should strive for? And of those on the other end who are told that an apology or scolding is deserved and all that's needed to pay their dues, how are victims supposed to accept they won't simply repeat the act and expect to be excused in the same way? I find it hard to accept either because I've seen the fruits of both. The people who hurt me over and over again and told me, but I apologize, seemed baffled by my hurt, and I felt terrified to express in detail how I felt because of their confusion and subsequent refusal to listen to anything. Even when they did want me to be mad at them and I did get mad at them, nothing changed because they felt, well, I paid my dues and just moved on and kept doing the same thing. If Natsuki's willingness to repeat the same acts again rather than try to admit to it all and listen is anything to go by, I don't think she'd be anything different. What it takes for people to be able to reconcile is a radical shift in thinking from blame and tolerance. Should the victim be willing, even though there should be no expectation for them to, it takes both sides being willing to listen to each other without desiring punishment and meaningless apologia, without expecting altruism for the sake of being polite, because that's not politeness or kindness. And for many people who have made awful mistakes, that's a hard pill to swallow because society so heavily punishes mistakes that it can feel easier to just continue being a shit rather than own up to it, because people's view of you has already plummeted so heavily. But even if you can't do better for the people you've hurt, you can at least do better for those you haven't. I know it's possible, even if our current system of forgiveness purely for punishment, as well as victim blaming, seems to make it impossible. What I think makes the end of Natsuki's arc so poignant is that, in her last moments, she asserts for Itsuki that he can't keep thinking in this altruistic way and forgive everything because she's family, because it's kind to. Even though it's too little too late, she takes responsibility for her failures, and I think the way she does hammers home something that many people need to hear. Kindness is not an innate virtue, and forgiveness and blame do not erase misdeeds. Kindness cannot be your only way of life. You have to listen to your other emotions, you have to stand for yourself, you have to know when you're hurt, and if you've hurt others, you have to be willing to listen. You cannot let your kindness or your guilt turn to rot. And thus, we move to the last part of the first act. Technically, the second act according to the official's guidebook, but fuck it, we're separating the two for the sake of this video. Yoshino's arc, wherein we're painted a picture of the rather poor life that she lived with Takayaki and Judy. After the death of Akane, his first wife, Takayaki became despondent, and though one might believe that marrying to another woman and feeling love again would reignite a spark to live, things don't go so wonderfully. He still found himself unable to cope with the grief of her death, repeatedly saying that he's responsible for it, while Yoshino found herself unable to reach him. Time and time again, she was treated as more or less a lap to cry on for him, never truly returning her feelings, nor making love to her, nor doing anything to support her. She was a prop, unable to do anything for him to stop him from taking his own life due to his own emotional blocks. It is strongly hinted at here that the impetus for his suicide, as well as Akane's, is the actions of Judy, but we as readers nor Itsuki don't get any clue yet as to why this is. All he has to go off of are fragments of a memory wherein his father cries to Yoshino about his struggles, vague flashbacks of an unknown man assaulting Judy, and a brutal scene of Yoshino tearing into a mysterious person, who is probably Judy. From everything that happened, Yoshino had been left a mess of a woman, kind and patient, caring and motherly, yet filled with joy she cannot express and desires that would rot the very fabric of her family. Namely, fantasizing about Itsuki due to his suspicious similarities to his father, leading her to be filled with guilt time and time again as she holds herself back for the sake of not hurting anybody. Unfortunately, with the influence of Kurame, that restraint snaps after she leverages Yoshino's trauma around Judy in order to lead her on a hunt and infect her with rot, subsequently finding her inhibitions deteriorating and seducing Itsuki in a moment of desperation for love. Though she's elated at finally getting what she desired all this time, pleasure from her own stepson that resembles her forlorn love, the consequences of her actions don't go unnoticed. Jun immediately picks up on the change in atmosphere of the family from before, and Itsuki is left feeling guilty as if he'd betrayed Jun's trust and the very sacred bonds and fabric of family ties. But Yoshino, absorbed in her fever, pays no attention to anything he says and pulls him outside to run away together in elated love. Dancing through the forest like a little girl, freed of her inhibitions that bound her, she finds herself shocked when her blindness vanishes for just a moment long enough to see Itsuki before stumbling onto the ground and fading into crimson snow as she cries in joy. Of the three arcs, Yoshino's is by far the one that I think leans the heaviest into elements of horror. Between the sequences that follow her point of view and show sad and empty prose, to her fighting her blindness to chase after Kurame in pure rage, and the sense of rotten collapse as she becomes obsessive and ultimately breaks the trust of her stepson, it's a difficult arc to stomach. All of these elements are used to finally bring that core theme of forbidden fruit and rot to full fruition. Yoshino willingly breaks what everyone sees as sacred family bonds and throws away all of her feelings of guilt and apprehension to fulfill the desires of her heart, and yet in the end, what does she have to show for this? What becomes the fruits of her labor, all of which had fallen to rot? Narratively speaking, it's the death of her character, because without this tension in her mind that the desire creates, she has nowhere left to go beyond simply drifting around. The same goes for Kiriko and Natsuki as well. They have fulfilled their purpose within the looping world and accelerated their lives to the end in an instant. All that's left are the hollowed out husks that Kurame creates. And I think this says something interesting about how the parts we keep hidden within ourselves and the tension those parts create are part of what makes us human and able to empathize with others. Kusarihime, as fiction, obviously exaggerates the level of this darkness in order to leave an impact on the readers and emphasize the taboo. Even if most people's fuckliness does not go to that extent in their brain palaces, however, most people do still have fucked up thoughts and feelings, and those can often influence how we draw boundaries around people. Unless it's someone who has truly let go of their inhibitions and gone to rot like Yoshino Natsuki, and desires like those to burn bridges or cause harm for any number of reasons can serve as reminders of what we're capable of at our worst. It's easy to chastise yourself for these feelings, but I think that, as well as believing you're more virtuous than others for not acting on them, are quick ways to hit the pride before your fall. If you think you're too good to cause trouble, if you think you're too worthless to matter, then just how many steps away are you from accepting that you're too much of a good one or too far gone for your actions to matter? One of the greatest exercises to build empathy not only for yourself but for other people is to try and accept your flaws and troubles as they are and not hate yourself for it. It's not easy, and I'm sure as shit not good at it, but even simply trying to for years has made me feel a lot better about myself and about others. It's made me care more about others and accept things that I wouldn't otherwise accept, and it's kept me from rotting. Of course, I've made a lot of mistakes, and within a story, those might be the end of my arc, but thankfully, we don't live in stories where an inhibition breaking or a part rotting ends us. Reality goes on no matter our failings, and though that might be painful to accept, it's what gives us chances to grow. We can answer to the consequences of our actions and subsequently find chances to turn things around and cease the rot. And now we move on to the second half of the game, and the one that throws everything for a loop, if you will. With many of the people closest to Itsuki now dead and replaced by lifeless mimics, his memories continue to keep returning to him, but the nature of them slowly grows more painful. Peaceful times with his family are contrasted with horrors he had forgotten. Judy's assault, her jealousy, Seiji's past with Natsuki, and a hollow visage of his mother whispering his name all weigh on him. The 7th and 8th loops are probably the most soul-destroying in the entire game. They're where we see Itsuki finally crack under the pressure of being a human with a life. All of his desperation added up to nothing except suffering. It very aptly captures what I guess I can only describe as the isolated despair of trauma. The feeling that you are the only person to bear the pain of your life in the face of those responsible being in denial or no longer existing. Judy, Akane, Takeaki, Yoshino, and Natsuki are all dead, and so we return to the conundrum that I described in Natsuki's route. To forget is to feel hollow, and to remember is to suffer. For Itsuki, his entire existence now has become this. Horrible memories tainting the beauty of his past that once briefly existed in his mind, repeating these same 4 days over and over again. So what then should he be hoping for going forward? To remember nothing and be nothing? To continue remembering and wounding the past, all for a future that's headed towards never-ending demise? The only other option is to no longer wish nor hope, but that can only lead to despair. At least that's what he feels he's faced with in his darkest moment and confesses to Seiji. Though he'd been a side character up to this point, it's in the 8th loop that we see him finally take action. Feeling guilt from having been unable to protect Itsuki from Natsuki, unable to be there for him after the death of his mother, he sees Itsuki's current struggle as a chance for him to finally do something where he couldn't before. And in that darkest moment, crying out that he wants to stop remembering everything with the unerasable pain becoming too much to bear, Seiji holds him and tells him he doesn't have to fight this alone. He doesn't want Itsuki to suffer alone, even if he doesn't know what's happening, even if he can't understand this talk of time repeating, the world dissolving into snow, he knows he can be there for him. And thus, we cut to a year later in Tokyo. Itsuki and Seiji have escaped Dokkan Mori and are living alone together. And yet, despite Seiji's requesting otherwise, Itsuki cannot bring himself to stop visiting the town, leaving unrepeated 3-day-long trips that always end in it covered in red snow, despondently telling Seiji about each and every outing. There may not ever be a way to get him to stop, but at the very least, he's not suffering alone anymore. Ending the loop here, I feel, was a really powerful choice, because as much as I want there to be some sort of positive resolution for the two, because holy god, yaoi in a game marketed towards men, it speaks a lot to Seiji's determination, the actual genuine goodness of another person, to trying to keep Itsuki together through it all, not knowing if there may ever be a light at the end of this tunnel. However, there may very well be, even if not in this repetition. The 9th loop is the one that finally gives us answers regarding Jun's past with everybody else, as well as giving us a sudden bizarre change at the end. Rather than Itsuki meeting of Kurame, Jun is the one to find her, and with none of her usual gusto. Dazed and empty, Jun and the husk of Yoshino work to try and keep her fed and bathed, until Jun suddenly falls ill with a cold, and is visited by a hallucination of Judy. Though we as players have been seeing them throughout the game as manifestations of Itsuki's mind, and a cold reminder that whatever she did has not been forgotten by the people who knew her, this is the first time we've seen a different character hallucinate and taunt her, saying Jun can never be Itsuki's sister because only she can ever fill that role. And mysteriously, right after that appearance, Kurame appears in Itsuki's room all healed up just to remind him of the worsening pain in his wound as he remembers more and more of his past. It's here we find out why Jun appears to hate Itsuki so much. It's not out of malice, but rather out of pain. Long before their remarriage, the two used to be childhood friends who went to the same school and knew each other from a part-time job Itsuki worked. The friendship ending somewhat solemnly as Jun, who had begun to develop a crush on Itsuki, received a gift of nice headphones from him, which she didn't even seem to be cognizant of the impact on her, leaving her only with a quaint goodbye despite her active crush. With the arrival of the remarriage, however, this would not be the end of her association with Itsuki and Judy, the latter a childhood friend she played with from time to time. Though Itsuki becoming a stepbrother squashed any hopes of being able to love him as a partner, Judy was so feverishly attached to Itsuki that she readily denied Jun any opportunity to get to know him as a sister for fear it may take him away from her. All of this, alongside things Itsuki is yet to remember in full, are why both Yoshino and Jun have such violent reactions to the mere idea of Judy's presence, and why Jun believes the hallucinations of her are real since they seem like her spirit coming back to haunt and target Jun and her mother. And so, the next morning, seeing Kurame running around and believing it to be Judy, Jun enters a daze, and murders her. With the specter of Judy slain, in reality a body of Kurame, Jun breaks and begs for Itsuki to finally acknowledge her and care for her as she's always wanted. With the being that had been taunting her for an entire life gone, there's no reason anymore that the two can't finally become close as siblings, as lovers, as whatever dynamic their bizarre lives as step-siblings separated from each other would throw them into. And yet, somehow, despite what just happened, Kurame appears in front of Itsuki hours later in Jun's room, answering ambivalently to the question of whether or not she hurt Jun. Though we later learn that she survives even through the final loops, Itsuki has no idea of this at the time and threatens to kill Kurame, which almost seems to delight her. After all, according to her, Itsuki is the same kind of being as her, and that's the only thing that could potentially end her existence. And so we close the loop on a twist that turns the entire game on its head. A woman caressing the hollowed corpse of a robed man seated on a bizarre chair within a vine-covered tower overlooking a world lined with graves and emptiness. This is where things start to get complicated as the nature of this story as a closed loop reveals itself and we start dealing with time paradoxes. I won't say my take is completely accurate, but I've tried to verify as much as I can for cross-examining my ideas with others and reading through as much official material as I can, so here we go. What we're seeing here, as elaborated on in the 11th loop and explained fully in side materials, is a planet that was once filled with advanced and logic-driven life akin to the Vulcans, who had a deep understanding of each other and were driven by facts and logic. Within this, however, a realization occurred that could not be denied. Their civilization, in time, will head to ruin. Potentially under the influence of their god, they believed euthanization to be the only response to this dilemma and collectively prayed. And so, it answered to their call and turned them all to crimson snow, leaving it alone by itself, off to search the stars to find another god of equal power which could end its otherwise immortal existence. Traveling from star to star and losing control over time, it eventually settled on Earth, and the being it found to hold the potential to enter godhood was Itsuki. This is where the 10th loop picks up from. The Earth, now consumed by crimson snow, is a lonely and desolate star, ruined by potentially thousands of years of consumption. The only person left alive is Itsuki, who, according to the evil god's plans, has identical powers awakened within him. In his loneliness, he finds this god in the shape of the Forbidden Bee-Ball and reforms it in the image of the person most important to him, Judy. With this memory of some unknown period in time recalled, Itsuki begins traveling through the past to see more of his life, witnessing his birth, learning that Judy had killed the family dog Kuro, seeing Yoshino grieve Takayake and his lack of love, and finally meeting with Judy herself, who confirms everything he's heard to be true and cements the final details of the story. The full tale goes that Akane and Takayake were two siblings in the village of Tokomori that fell in love with each other, an act they initially tried to keep concealed but couldn't keep so for long and led to them being shamed. Both of them struggled with their own issues beyond this. Takayake was dedicated to his work and often emotionally absent, and Akane was often depressed and despondent, leading to her two children, Judy and Itsuki, to be left to their own devices. With only slivers of parental care and happy memories given, no idea how to be in this world, and perhaps ill-influenced by her parents' own incestuous relationship, Judy latched onto her brother with an intense affection that quickly turned romantic and violent in time, fiercely protecting her relationship to him by letting no outside forces interfere. Eventually, this went as far as talking her mother into committing suicide, which sent her father into an even more depressive state that not even finding another love could help. Instead, Judy just made everything worse for the family she just entered, pushing Yoshino down a flight of stairs, potentially attempting to drown Jun, talking her father into taking his own life, and eventually attempting a lover's suicide of Itsuki, a boy who cared so deeply for her that he would stay by her side no matter what. Except, while Judy died in the frozen lake, Itsuki survived without his memory. Potentially, as he may have also died. There's conflicting evidence on this. Regardless, the Itsuki that exists now, a time-traveling god, is not the same Itsuki that once was. That Itsuki died with his memories, and though the one we see now is the same vessel of a person, they are at least spiritually different. An Itsuki who has not held the prerequisites to be the one that loved his sister no matter what. Even as the futility of everything he's done just dawns on him though, there is a hint as to where he should be going from here, bestowed in yet another scene when he finally meets with Akane one last time. Itsuki finds Kurame in the abandoned mine, who cries to him about the suffering of living this existence in eternal damnation, and tells him the memory of her last moments on her homeworld, a glimpse of the fate that now awaits Earth. Both of them are beings that cannot die except by the power of an equal force, and without death, they can only sustain themselves by devouring planet after planet. Like humans, they are beings that must destroy to exist. All of this then begs the question, why do these gods exist? More than that, why does anything exist? If all we are, up to the very top of the spiritual food chain, are beings of consumption who move from one land to another to consume indefinitely to prolong our existences that are filled with pain and destruction, why do we continue to exist? Why do such insignificant specks in this now clearly horrifyingly grand cosmos exist? As these questions lay heavy on his mind, Itsuki and Kurame head out to town to observe Tokamori one last time and choose their destiny. Either they can take each other's lives and end the cycle once and for all, or continue to exist and accept their nature as beings of destruction and consumption. Or, as Itsuki posits, they can sacrifice each other's power and reincarnate as humans, which end up being Takeaki and Akane. By attempting to run from what they believe to be the source of their distress, life as innately malevolent gods, they instead find a different kind of distress, reincarnating as two broken people who over and over and over again perpetuate these same cycles of abuse, passing their tainted ideas of love down to their own children who will repeat these same errors. Through this, the two have made a closed loop for Itsuki and Kurame by extension. Any linear path in his life up for becoming an amnesiac is gone, and everything has been thrown into disarray, a non-linear disaster of a timeline of recursive circumstances that keep writing new events into the timeline. However, there is a way out if the two accept that their lives must come to an end, an act of mutual euthanasia. Holding Kurame close to him, the two gaze upon the blue sky one last time, admiring the beauty of it and the people who live under it. Quietly, solemnly, the two begin to end their lives as Kurame is struck by a sudden sensation. Even though she believes herself to be without a heart, she feels sadness, and Itsuki feels gratitude for this moment of serenity given by her. As the two fade into crimson snow, the loop is no more. It's a very solemn yet resonant true ending. After everything they'd been through in their respective lives and the hell that they caused for each other merely by existing and chasing each other around, they were finally able to find and accept at least a fragment of peace. Itsuki has his memories and his powers back, Kurame experiences emotion and learns what humanity is, and their life just ends as they hold their care for each other dear. I think this entire arc with all the sci-fi it introduces is where you can really tell Meteo's affection for the concepts of Lovecraft's work coming in. Through the sudden introduction of a galactic scale of Kurame's past and the reveal that these loops have been happening infinitely and could on many worlds at that without us even being aware of it, very effectively sells just how small humans are on a grand level. It is, in no uncertain terms, not least because Meteo says it himself, cosmic horror. And I hated this when I initially read it. Bear with me here because I admit I was completely wrong, but I'm going somewhere for telling my gut reaction. The first ending I got, often wrongly called the true end, left me feeling depressed because of the implication there was no escaping the cycles of suffering. They would just reincarnate again and again and again and suffer again and again and again. The second left me feeling depressed because of the implication that life beyond a certain point only means to hurt others, that there is no happiness at the end of it all. And this, the third and true ending, left me feeling depressed because I saw it as almost implying that suicide is the only answer to a life of suffering. Combine it with the theme explored earlier of people reaching an apex and rotting with nothing to come back from, and I didn't really know how to take any of it and believed to be saying something awful that terrified me because it reminded me too much of myself in the past. There were points in my life where I'd enter that state of modern nihilism, that humans are insignificant, life is inevitable suffering, joy is fleeting, God is dead, and his eternal death means our only escape is the embrace of death. Because I felt no matter how I tried to heal, no matter what peace I tried to find, I kept finding more and more suffering buried in my memory to the point it weighed on my body beyond what I could hold. Therapy sessions often left me depressed for what they made me realize. Any hopes I had that perhaps my past was bright and I was overstating things disappeared. Everything felt meaningless in the face of things I'd been through and forgotten. The mind does not like to experience pain, and the erasure of the past that comes with it is often far more a curse than a blessing when you must become reacquainted with it all. But like I said, I was wrong. Though this game does make clear that humans, even gods, are insignificant in the universe, it's only to instill a sense of dread akin to the works of Lovecraft, and then to recontextualize it into a reason to hold on to even the smallest things that are dear to you and to others. A rhetoric that I have gotten very tired of seeing is how people insist that slice of life is insufferably dull. And it's not just an internet thing either, I've had very offline people express this to me. They want to see the action, the comedy, the sakuga, but they don't want to engage with all the bulk that comes to get to that point. After all, surely nothing of interest happens there, right? Personally, I've always been in the opposite camp. Seeing characters just talk is nice. After all, a lot of what people do is talking. Some people may live for frills, but even those who desire the most adrenaline life can offer can't deny that there is something beautiful to just being around others. And throughout all of the chaos that occurs in Kusarihime, and with how dense the text can be, I think it can be really easy to forget how much of the game is spent with people just enjoying the atmosphere and each other. I made a parallel to YKK earlier, and that bears importance even beyond its impact on the game's artwork, because it, as a series, is all about how small joys and memories, as impermanent as they may be in the face of the end of the world, matter and are worth our time. After all, if no meaning exists in a higher power and greater universe, if humans are just little specks, then why don't we create our own meaning in even the littlest of places? And this is what leads me back to the discussion of memory that I've been dodging this entire time. Itsuki's situation ties a lot into the cosmic horror. Not only is the reality of this all repeating and being unstoppable chilling, but we're forced to reconcile with something by the end. Itsuki's humanity does not matter on the grand scale. For as much as we spend the majority of the game wanting the best for him, wanting him to remember his past and be who he believed he was, because we commonly believe that memories are the most important thing to us, he's a god. In not just a philosophical sense, but a literal sense, Itsuki's individual personhood means nothing and only brings him suffering. And that is fucking terrifying to consider, as someone whose experience of life has, up until about this point, mostly been suffering and led me down that aforementioned nihilistic arc. The despair, the feeling of worthlessness in the grand scheme, and just feeling empty. And yet, even with all that I've experienced, there were slivers of joy. I've talked about this before in the Shinjuku video, but it bears repeating. Those slivers kept me going, kept me feeling connected with people, and though they may have been buried at times by the suffering I went through, they were never gone. They were a part of me as much as the pain, and even when I couldn't remember them, they existed as some small thing that kept me going. And throughout Kusarihime, I think much of the same is present. Even with the worst people here, there are moments of joy and warmth that can only be spoken of as good. There are sentiments and beliefs that are so moving as to be inspiring. There's calm so tranquil that it permeates the deepest recesses of the mind. Despite all of the chaos, there is still beauty. And there's some really poignant irony in this, I think, that I've spent so much of my life living in chaos and being ignorant of my own happiness that I felt at points, that even at the point where I think I understand the most about my disaster of a brain, I accuse this game of the same broken nihilism that I once lived under, even looking past how the very final moment attempts to contradict this through its own contradictions. That brief, minuscule flicker of human emotion Kurime experiences, something that many of us would not even think about, is more powerful than one could dream of. The emphasis is not on the pain they've been through, but the way that pain made something small and beautiful feel grand. The emphasis is not on the insignificance of their death itself, but the way the existence of that death gave reason for them to find meaning in life, even if only at the very end. These contradictions, depraved desires creating deep empathy, pain leading to a greater love for joy, death creating meaningful life, are fundamentally human. Our memories embody all of this and create us through it. All that we have been through gives us reason to make meaning. Suffering does not build character, but it is an inevitability, and the greatest thing we can do with it is find a way to channel it into light for others and allow others to do it for us. We cannot run from our pain, whether it's from our rod or from others, for the wounds it leaves in our soul are so deep that even an empty mind cannot avoid it. Because dark can be so much stronger than light in our minds. Losing our memories does not mean erasing that darkness, it just means losing the tools to find the light that's hidden within. And if I may be cliche and quote Nietzsche, I want to learn more and more to see as beautiful what is necessary in things. Then I shall be one of those who makes things beautiful. Amor fati, let that be my love henceforth. I do not want to accuse. I do not even want to accuse those who accuse. Looking away shall be my only negation. And all in all and on the whole, someday I wish only to be a yes-sayer. Clocking in at around 12 hours of playtime, Kusarihime is by far one of the shortest games I've covered on this channel, yet still somehow one of the most dense and challenging to create stable thoughts on. It's a game that really left an impact on me. First despair and frustration, then a quiet, solemn appreciation for all that I experienced in life, and I'm grateful to it for making me think so much. As well as that, it's one of the rare times I feel one of these legendary horror VNs actually lives up to the hype that it's been given. I had pretty negative feelings about Shizuku, still don't know what to make of Sayoroshi beyond it being wacky Erogudo nonsense, and I see Jisatsu 101 as a fascinating disaster. But Kusarihime is just a straight up well put together game that does everything it wants to without faltering in any way that isn't tertiary to the quality of the experience. And like I said in the intro, it's thankfully still easy to get a hold of. I got my copy on today's sponsor, DL site, with a coupon while it was off sale, but the game very regularly hits steep discounts that take it down to 50% off or greater. Whether at 3,000 or 1,500 yen, I really don't think you can go wrong with this release. The only thing that I think is disappointing is that no matter which release you get, you still don't get the 2004 prequel, Je m'ai vu, which really helps to clear up some ambiguous story details and flesh out Judy as a character. As for the legendary company that made this game, Liarsoft, well, I mean, they're a legendary company, what else can I say? Forest, Inganok, Shardnoth, Evermaiden, Alpha Nighthawk, Fairy Tail Requiem, Yuri-Ray, Angel Bullet, they have one hell of a diverse library, and I really doubt this game is going to be the last we see of them on this channel. Weird, inventive, terrifying, and resonant, Kusarihime is one of the most creative experiences you're bound to find within the VN genre, and one that deserves to be known as more than just a progenitor to bigger franchises. I hope, in some part, this video contributes to people being aware of it as a work unto itself, and perhaps one day, a wider release can make your fates cross with it once again.